Welcome back to TruthCurrents. We've taken a Christmas vacation and now we're back for the start of a new year. There's a lot of subjects that we need to cover in days ahead, but I want to start the new year with a reminder of what TruthCurrents is and why we do it. So let's talk about that. Certainly there's a lot for us to cover in weeks ahead. We've got apostasy within American evangelicalism to discuss. We've got corruption within our political system. We now have a Roman Catholic Pope who is advocating true heresy. There's a lot for us to discuss, but I want to go back and explain why I do what I do on TruthCurrents. One of the most common criticisms that I get comes typically from other pastors who say, you're creating division, you're being judgmental, you're being too harsh. That's not new. Since about the 1990s, pastors in America have hidden behind a lot of different sayings that you'll recognize. I've heard them so many times. They say things like, well, we draw circles, not lines. We want to be known for what we're for, not what we're against. We want to handle these issues privately in groups, not publicly in services. And this is my favorite. We don't take positions, we have conversations. Well, I want to give you some reasons why all of those are unbiblical dodges from the responsibility that pastors have to shepherd the flock of God that's been placed in their charge. I want to explain why I do TruthCurrents. I'm sort of like the book of Jude, where Jude wrote, I wanted to write to you about our common salvation. I wanted to talk to you about the things that we can celebrate, but I was compelled to write to you instead, to ask you to earnestly contend for the faith. We live in a moment in history when we are not given the opportunity to simply revel in what we love. We have been placed in a strategic moment where we have to take a stand for truth, and I want to explain what's at stake. First of all, when pastors don't speak to controversial issues, they leave the sheep to the mercy of the wolves. We know that Satan is the father of lies, and the primary way that wolves devour the sheep in our day is through false ideas. Our people in our churches are being indoctrinated with lies 24/7 by media, by social media, by higher education, and certainly by the entertainment industries. If the church won't disciple people, guess what? The world will do it. Pastors are charged with helping people be able to discern truth from falsehood. And when a pastor says, well, I don't speak to controversial issues, he is feeding his sheep to the wolves. Secondly, when you refuse to discuss controversial issues, I believe you're accidentally facilitating the future split of your church. What do you mean by that? I'm told all the time by pastors that they avoid teaching on tough issues like sexuality and the truth questions of the great issues of our day. And what they discover is over time, because they've avoided those topics, they end up with a church that holds a whole variety of views on those same issues, which guarantees that at some point in the future, there's going to be a division of those points of views. A perfect example is what we've seen happening in the United Methodist Church. The American branch of the United Methodist Church has spent so many years avoiding difficult topics that now when they come to the place where they have to make a biblical decision about gender, about marriage, about what the Bible speaks about those topics, now they are hemorrhaging not just individual church members, but entire congregations, because by not establishing a place that they would take a stand on, an unshakable position on these biblical issues, They have guaranteed that their constituency has been made up of people who have a whole variety of issues. Pastors say, well, you're only going to get a certain kind of people that come to your church. Well, here's the thing about that. Churches do not move at the speed of the talent of their leadership. Churches don't move at the quality of their strategies. Churches move forward at the speed of unity. So if I want the people of our church to be on the same page about difficult issues, I think I'm actually securing the future of our church rather than endangering it. When we have concerns that we don't want to offend anybody by our teaching, what we do is we prioritize the needs of the evil over the needs of the wise. The book of Proverbs categorizes 3 different kinds of people. The wise are people that have biblical beliefs. The simple are people who are willing to adopt biblical beliefs when they're corrected. And then the evil, those are the people who are hostile to biblical beliefs. Now what happens is when a pastor accommodates those people who have a hostility to biblical beliefs by avoiding speaking about those biblical doctrines, what he does is he prioritizes their sensitivities, their hostility towards truth. He prioritizes their feelings over the needs of the wise and the simple. And what happens is, over the course of time, the wise and the simple will both migrate out of the church until all you're left with are those who are hostile to biblical beliefs, which is how we now have churches in our country that hold positions that are diametrically opposed to what the Bible teaches, and they're very prideful that they hold those progressive positions. When a pastor refuses to speak about controversial issues, frankly, he's not only putting his church in danger, he is damaging the surrounding culture. You say, well, how is that? It's because the surrounding culture needs the church to be the church so that we can provide a reference point by which people can understand what actually is true. One writer put it this way. He said the culture's in danger of dying of AIDS. If you remember AIDS back when that was a new thing a generation ago, people didn't actually die of AIDS. They died because AIDS destroyed the immune system, and people then died of a whole host of other things that the body couldn't fight off because the immune system was compromised. Well, I'm here to tell you that the church is the immune system of our culture. If the church goes silent in the face of error and evil, the immune system is compromised, and then society can die of anything. Matthew 5, verse 13 tells us, if the salt loses its saltiness, it's no longer good for anything. The church has tried to blend in too long. We're supposed to be a little salty because the culture needs that from us. Let me give you an example of how that works. 30 years ago, it was a popular strategy to avoid preaching controversial issues because we were told that it repels unbelievers. But now, Ray Ortlund, a Christian writer, has made this statement. He said, today the devil has overplayed his hand. You see, the woke sexual revolution of our generation has devolved into utter absurdity. I mean, people now hold ideas that the average man in the street looks at and understands that that is absolute nonsense. We have, for the first time in many generations, we have an opportunity for evangelism because we've taken a stand on what's true. And it's from this reason. Where we were once told that those fierce stands for truth repelled unbelievers, the fact of the matter is today, unbelievers are asking themselves, they're looking at the church with some interest, and they're thinking, who else is going to tell my daughter not to become a man so that we can have a stable family? Cultural insanity all around us has created a unique evangelistic opportunity, but it requires leadership from the pulpit to speak truth about difficult topics. Here's where I land, and the reason that I do Truth Currents. I've been told many times that coming down hard on certain issues, taking certain stands, it hurts people, it offends them, it ruffles their feathers. I want you to understand the way I look at being a pastor. Jesus tells us that the second greatest commandment after love your God with all your heart, the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Part of my job is to personally love other people and to lead a church till they become people who love other people. Now that's critical. It's an important definition of who we are. But there's also a verse that balances that. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. Paul is justifying his hard-nosed stance on some moral issues in his day, and he says this, "We are destroying arguments and all arrogance raised against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." Now what that means is, while part of my job is to love my neighbor as myself, another part of my job is to destroy the arguments that the enemy uses to destroy lives. To come at that, to dig in my heels, and to do intellectual, spiritual battle with weapons of warfare that are spiritual, to contest those dangerous stances that our culture is adopting. To love people, you have to destroy the arguments that enslave them to sin. There are too many pastors who have a good desire to love people, but they're too cowardly, frankly, to destroy arguments. There are others, out of a good desire to destroy arguments, are too callous and judgmental to love people. There's a balance here. Randy Alcorn calls it the grace-truth paradox. If you give people truth without grace, you become judgmental and harsh. If you give people grace without truth, you become so soft that they will believe anything because there are no standards. Truth Currents is designed to be a place where I destroy arguments, where I combat the cultural insanity around us. But I hope that I always come across at the end of the day doing this because I love people and I don't want them to be damaged by the lies that Satan has abroad in the land in our generation. But here's the last reason that I do Truth Currents. And it's because I don't want to expect my church members to have more courage than their pastor. I've seen people who have to go into secular workplaces every Monday morning, and they are faced with all kinds of hostility towards truth. They're faced with hostility towards the fact that they're Christians, the fact that they believe the Bible, the fact that they don't hold the cultural party line on so many current topics. There are pastors who know that their church members are facing real challenges in the workplace, but because they're cowards, they leave them to fend for themselves. My task is to try and help you learn how to think biblically so that you're prepared to face the difficult challenges that come across your sphere of influence. If I'm too cowardly to speak truth, to take biblical stands, then in effect, I'm asking you to be braver out in the culture than I am. And I'm not okay with that. God has called me to lead, not to follow. So if I can take some of the shots, if I can take some of the brunt of the opposition so that you're better prepared in your own sphere of influence to stand for Christ, then together we will be faithful to what God has called us to do. We've got a lot of topics coming up this semester, a lot of events that need biblical analysis. But I wanted you to just know that as we begin fresh in 2024, we don't do this because we're looking for a social media presence. We're trying to create a niche market. I'm trying to build a personal kingdom. None of that. We are here to prepare ourselves together to both love people and destroy the arguments of the enemy. That's our charge. That's our intention. Join me. This is Truth Currents.